friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. MaryBeth, I am so glad to have the chance to talk to you today, and thank you so much for joining our podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I love to start all of my conversations just asking about the role of mindfulness in my guest's life. So I'd love to hear how that works for you.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of come gradually to mindfulness over decades. Starting in medicine, I had a program director who had a person who taught yoga, and she was a very mindful yoga teacher. She was very gentle, and it was a good place to be in the middle of the chaos of medicine. And then over the years, I also ran into the Bhantes that have free meditation here in Fox Chapel. They used to at the library, but now it's in Oakmont. And just an hour of peace on Tuesday nights was a really nice thing. And it's helped me to let go of some anxieties and let go of some worries that really aren't in your control. So that's been my course, and that's where I am.
Awesome. Do you have a regular practice that you love to do? I'd love to hear you describe whatever that is.
Well, I usually do Monday night yoga with my teacher, Adrienne. She does an online yoga from 6 to 7:15 with a group of people that I've been doing with for decades. And it's nice to see their faces and do that. And then on the Tuesday nights, I have the meditation. And then just in general, the singing, I also sing, and that's been something that gets me grounded in myself and less reactive, I guess, more peaceful.
I love this. So you're actually describing all these different modalities. Sometimes people think of meditation as the only way to practice mindfulness, and you describe that with, I love that you call them the Bhantes. So
Yeah.
for listeners who don't know, that is like an honorific title for a monk in certain cultures, and the Bhantes that are here local are all from Sri Lanka. So in case someone didn't know who the Bhantes were, but so they do lead like, what we would think of as traditional meditation practice. But you've also described body-based practice, which is movement through yoga, which is another fantastic way to incorporate mindfulness, and then singing. So there's also the
Dance.
creative,
Yeah.
yeah, the creative aspect of our lives that people don't always name as part of a mindfulness practice. But I love that you're naming that because one, we know now from research on trauma that singing in community can be very
Oh,
healing,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
right? But there's also the quality of full presence when you sing.
Yeah. You can't multitask while you're singing.
That's right. So I think that's amazing. And I haven't actually Googled any research on it, but I would be super curious, in my in my geeky research mind to think about like what is that kind of brain science around what singing does, and especially community singing.
Well, and something really interesting about song and music is that the part of the brain that does singing is different than the part that does speech. And you
Yes.
can, in my role as a hospice physician, I would sometimes be with people who had had a stroke who couldn't speak.
Oh,
But at some point, if you sang, they would sing together and the family would be like, oh my God, they haven't spoken a word. And it's just
yes.
amazing to me that it's a totally different part of the brain.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm really curious to go Google that after we're done. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that you mentioned about your practice is the joy of being with people that you've been with for years. And
Yeah.
sometimes in Buddhist practices, that's called Sangha, but it's
Ah,
community,
yeah,
right? It's
absolutely.
community, and how having that community is such a support for our practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just having someone else, for me, being in medicine and having to make many, 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 many decisions, to have someone else sort of guide the conversation and the meditation sometimes is so relieving for me to not have to worry, what do I have to do?
Mm.
It just, I follow the flow. It's a moment of non-decision and just being.
Yes. Yeah, and don't we all need that?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I feel that, there's a thing called decision fatigue,
Oh,
right?
definitely. Yeah. Even like what's for dinner tonight? It's like, really?
Yeah, yeah. When you start to feel that decision fatigue, even that becomes like, I just don't even wanna. I don't
Yeah.
wanna have to deal with it. Yeah, that's real, especially for people who are in leadership positions. And of course, physicians in your own way are in leadership and decision making, constant mode of decision making.
Yeah. And then there's one other mindfulness practice I think I have to put in, and that is holding a sleeping baby now that I'm a grandma.
Oh,
And there is nothing more mindful than just watching those little eyelids flutter and the mouth pucker, and
oh.
they smell so good. And
And you have a newer one too, don't you?
2 months old. Yep. It's
Yeah.
so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And that brings in again that human connection, right? That sometimes people I think of meditation as something we do as a solitary navel gazing kind of practice, right? But really, for me, and this can transition us to our topic for today, the practice is actually, yes, looking at ourselves, but how do we then take that and enact it in the world?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, holding a baby, you think of the future and you think of
Yes.
the world they're going to be in, and nurturing them to be the best person they can be without feeling judged or, yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, our topic for today is kindness. And so, I would love to hear what kindness means to you.
So kindness for me is like the automatic assumption of best intent of people that I'm with. I try not to default into any other mode if I can, because most often the times that I get into rubs with people, it's when it's been a misunderstanding of intent. And when I can really just be curious and open and let whatever's going to happen in the best way it can happen, that to me is kindness. Making space for people to be themselves.
That's so beautiful. And I think you're naming one of the qualities of, or it's even in the definition of mindfulness, that quality of being curious and open,
Yeah,
right? To just be present and allow.
yeah. I mean, especially in hospice, when I would be dealing with people and families that were very intensely um, activated, and time is short and there's a lot of emotions going on, just sort of slowing down and letting everybody tell their stories, it all relaxed into something that was so beautiful. It's a really beautiful thing. Their birth and death are very similar in some ways. They're between two worlds, and just giving them the opportunity to not be anxious about it and just experience it. That's the ultimate in mindfulness, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of actual meditative practices for end of life even,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
how to be curious and open when we face our own death or the death of a loved one. There's this great story that I heard from a teacher that I had on a meditation retreat. He was the personal assistant to a Tibetan teacher named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was paralyzed on half of his body, so he always had someone that drove him around and helped him dress and things because he couldn't have all movement of his limbs. And he went to visit Shomari Suzuki Roshi, a Zen teacher who they were friends with, who was dying of cancer. He was in
Mm,
hospice, and so this teacher told the story that he took Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche to visit Suzuki Roshi. He went into the hospital room, and this guy waited in the hall because he didn't want to, like, he wanted to give them their privacy. And he said some time passed, and then Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche came out of the room smiling and laughing. And he said, Rinpoche, the guy's dying. Why are you laughing? And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, because he's so curious to know what it's going to be like,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
He's facing death like he did everything in life as a deep meditation master with curiosity and openness.
yeah, yeah. It's really something. I I often, if we were, if when I was on the inpatient unit, if there was somebody that was in extreme pain or something, obviously we would give them some medications, but I would often just go in the room and match my breathing with them and then slow my breathing. And often they would too and relax. It was
Mhm.
amazing. I mean, you could feel a connection, you know, it was it was a very private and special thing.
Yeah, and that for me feels like bringing your breath focused awareness practice directly into
Yeah,
your medical caring for others
yeah,
as a doctor. That's really, really beautiful. I love that, Mary Beth.
yeah, yeah,
And we do
yeah.
that with children. I think we do that with kids too, like
Yes,
especially little
absolutely.
babies, right?
Yep, yep, absolutely.
When they're upset and they're crying and you hold them on your chest and you
Yep.
rock them and you
Where you
soothe
rub
them.
slowly. Yeah. Anything
Yeah.
like that to touch is so, yeah, yeah, that's very special. And
Yeah.
kids are so open to it too. And they
Mhm.
have such great curiosity.
They do. They do. Yeah. So I'm curious what other connections you might make between your own meditation and mindfulness practice, and maybe how that has supported you in bringing more kindness and compassion into the work that you've done, both in hospice and in your family practice, because you were also a family
Yeah,
practice doctor.
yeah. Um, I think so now that I'm no longer as an employed physician and I'm a volunteer physician, I get to spend more time. So I think where I find, I mean, I wish I could have done it more as a young physician, but there were so many time pressures and you had to get this many people in this much time. And to the extent that you went beyond that, it ended up taking from your family life. So it was hard to sustain. But now that I'm just doing the volunteer stuff, I get to say how many days a week and how many patients, and I can be with them, as much as they need. And that's at the Neighborhood Resilience Project. And I just do it a couple of days a month, but it's a wonderful opportunity there. They take people who have no insurance, and they ask no questions. We have people from the US, we have people from the Hill, we have people from Jamaica, all sorts of different situations that of people that are there. And sometimes, these people get their care only from emergency rooms and things. And there it's like the treat them or street them, you got to get out, you got to get out. There's, time pressure. And a lot of them will say, this is the first time I've had someone listen to me. And a lot of them are so traumatized by even what they had to do to get here, you know. And these are people just trying to get like pap smears or something, and you don't know if this woman has been raped on her journey here. It's really something to humble yourself into their shoes and say, listen, we'll go as slow as we need to, we'll do what we need to, you're safe, you know. Yeah,
Wow, that's there's so much in there, but
yeah,
I feel like what you're describing is bringing your full presence to the people that you're serving, and you had named this earlier, the chaos of medicine and the inability to be fully present to people because of the system.
yeah, the system is definitely broken. I mean, there are people trying to fix it, but
Yeah.
and pandemic didn't really help because it enabled them to say, okay, well, now we can do it distant. Now we can do it Zoom. And yes, you can make a connection somewhat by Zoom, but I fear that it's been used to give excuses for why it has to stay the way it is with the volume, and the reimbursement is less because it's Zoom. And so now we have to see more. And yeah,
Yeah.
I struggle with that sometimes. There's another group that I work with that I really love called the Academy of Communication in Healthcare. And they struggle mightily to bring wholeness of the person, physician person communication connection as the center of medicine. And that's another place that I encourage people, particularly if they're in medicine and they're looking for their tribe to support them as they try to stay mindful. That's a wonderful resource.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I'm curious about if there is a way that you think kindness or your mindfulness practice has supported you in being kinder to yourself.
I think that's been the hardest part. Um, yeah, I think that's the cusp that I'm on now, that I have the time to do now that I'm retired.
Mhm.
As a person with um, neurodivergence, some ADD, and you know, difficulty with administrative functioning or what have you, there's been a lot of could have, should have, would have, a lot of judgment, self-judgment on being a different thinker. And I think part of the mindfulness, part of the loving kindness meditation is to start with loving yourself, and giving the healing to yourself. And that's been so wonderful. Um, so yeah, and I also realize that it's my different thinking that sometimes helps me reach patients that wouldn't have been reached, or helps me forge friendships with people who you never know when you meet someone what they're going through at that moment. And it's not unusual for me to get a note from someone later to say, I don't know if you know this, but this really helped me, and it's so wonderful. Not because you want to be thanked, but because you start to think that it's not just a coincidence, that there's a wisdom to the world. That
Yeah.
you'll meet who you need to meet when you need to meet them, and you'll both get what you need out of that interaction.
And now let's take a pause to update you on some upcoming events from Awaken Pittsburgh.
Experience tranquility and mindfulness with Awaken Pittsburgh. Join us for open meditations on May 11th and May 20th. Whether in person or online, beginners are welcome. Plus, immerse yourself in our sound healing session on May 22nd from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Release stagnant energy and find alignment. Visit awakenpittsburgh.org/events for more information.
Now, back to our conversation. Yeah.
Just
And I
like
guess,
our interaction. I mean, just like me
yeah,
coming to work with you. I think that
yeah.
was one of those wonderful coincidences.
Yeah. And me, I'm always on the lookout for good volunteers.
Yeah, but it's not just that. I mean, I wish we had met decades ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's real. That's true. Well, I'm curious, Mary Beth, if you have any ideas about just in medicine in general. We've kind of talked about how it can be so chaotic. What can physicians be doing? Because I want to provide services to folks. What can physicians be doing to help themselves create calm in the chaos of the work, or find those opportunities to show kindness to patients, even though they're having to look at their watch and know that the next person's
Yeah.
already waiting?
Yeah, I know. I mean, being transparent, obviously, letting people know the system that you're in, and the extraneous um, pressures that you face, being honest about that so that they know it's not coming from your desire to keep them at hand's length. And I know many physicians who will stop, between room to room to just take a few centering breaths and sort of realize that you're walking in on another person's story. And even just viewing it as, what is this person's story? Because it's not just, the leg in room 4 or I mean, the stuff that you see on TV that is so trite, but sometimes so true. So just being curious to know what the story is enough that if it takes more, once people know that you're really listening, then they're willing to invest the time to say, this is what I can do today, but I really do want to know more, and I want to help more, and I want us to, work together. And then a lot of times they will.
I love that you're really suggesting, like, basically inserting a mindful pause in between seeing clients, right? Seeing patients. And um, I always ask people what their favorite resource is, but I'm going to just name one that comes to mind for me, and we can get to yours next. But Roshi Joan Halifax, who is a hospice worker in New Mexico, actually has something she calls the GRACE model, and we teach this in one of our classes. And it's all about, how do you enter a room with the best intention, be fully present, and relate to a patient, and then have a closure for yourself to reset, so that you can then go and see the next patient and be, in your integrity with the best intention, and show up in the best way. And for her, as a hospice worker, she found that without that, she would just hold the pain
Yeah.
of one patient as she went to the next, and then it would kind of snowball all
Yeah.
day if
Yeah.
you don't have a practice to kind of work through it, because it can be very difficult. So I love that you named that pause between patients.
Yeah. And that there's also, some groups and places. I'm thinking in, I don't know if it was Indiana or, but there's a physician, Inoue, Shina Inoue, who has things like built into the practice for the medical students in teaching, where the class from the previous year writes little poems or anything that they think would be helpful for the next year's class. And so each class gets, with their white coats, a little book that's got last year's poems and rooms for their own, and they pass that to the next class, then the next class, then the next class. So there's that sort of, it's almost like Japanese poems. What are those, the little, those,
Haiku.
yeah, it's distillations of things
Yeah.
that keep the humanity part of it. That's part of it. And also, I think practices like, we would have quarterly healing sessions, in a way we call them, where we would get together and have a remembrance session to come full circle with some of the patients that we had lost, so that it didn't just build up and build up and build up. And with my ACH tribe, they have a winter retreat every year where we work on ourselves, on our personal development, personal awareness, and mentor the young physicians and nurse practitioners and nurses. It's social workers. It's all people, dealing with the medical profession, and sort of bring them into the, once a year, where we all come together and have our grief, but have our joy. Not everybody's working with the dying, but there are things that you lose being in a profession that's so intense sometimes. And so it helps to, put yourself back together to keep it going.
I love that. I love that. And again, you're naming healing practices, community based practices, because you're not doing that as a solitary person. You're doing it in a group that understands you, that understands what you've been through, and you know, mentoring and caring for one another.
This last winter retreat that we had, I was in charge for the first time of doing the healing ceremony for the group. And we did a mindfulness meditation to start, the loving kindness. And then there was a practice that was talked about in the New York Times of when Jews would come to the Temple Mount, they would walk counterclockwise, doing their prayers in their heads. But there were individuals who were grieving, who were feeling like they couldn't be part of that, and they would walk in the opposite direction. And if you encountered one of those people, the tradition was to sort of ask them, what has happened to you? And they would give a brief sort of, my mother has died or whatever, and they would offer a prayer together, and then they would keep walking. And so we did that. And then at the end, we listened to an Indian prayer or chant of, I can't remember the name of it now, but if I remember it at the end, I'll put it in. It's just about how beautiful the world is and the things that you encounter. In beauty may I walk. That's what it's called. In beauty may I walk, the Navajo prayer.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was ours this year, and I had fun putting it together, and I thought it was an interesting experience to do that for other people.
Yeah, and it's creating a space to share your sorrows and your joys and hold that with care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, because it's the fullness. It makes it, you wouldn't enjoy the joy of much if you didn't experience the sorrow.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's the beauty for me of mindfulness practice, is growing the capacity to embrace the full human experience, the whole spectrum, from the very highs to the very lows, and having our internal capacity be there so that we feel that we can be present to all of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for me, the latest thing has been too that I'm a people pleaser. And so anger was not in my repertoire. And not to say that I should have to, but if you limit yourself, what I've learned now is to, instead of stuffing anger and saying, no, I have to please this person, I have to figure out why is that anger there. And that's a much different approach. It's much more healing to me to work with that and see what it is than to just stuff it and say, no, you have to be a people pleaser.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that, I think women are not socialized to feel their anger. We're often socialized to be helpers and people pleasers. And so in our programming that we do, we have specific practices that we work with anger around. And I've had women in that class tell me, I never get angry. I never feel my anger. They're completely shut off from it, and so I think
and then they wonder why they have depression and ulcers and because that anger is still there.
It's there. It gets displaced. And that's the idea, is that when you shut something off, you shut more than that off, and it then affects our health, mental health and physical health, right?
Right, absolutely.
Because I
think
think
you should take that class.
yeah, you can.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, you can. So that's and that's part of like growing that self-awareness through meditation and mindfulness, that the more that we notice our thinking, the more that we notice our emotions, the more that we're like, oh, that's there. I didn't know that was there. What is that? And then there's the curiosity you talked about.
Right. Yeah. So it's not a judgment thing. It's just okay, I have to do something with this or it will harm me and that person and the relationship.
That's right. That's right. And often with anger, there's something underneath. In fact, there's this fantastic quote from Lama Rod. He's an African American who got trained in the Tibetan tradition. So he's a Lama. He's a Tibetan Lama, Lama Rod Owens. And he says, anger is the bodyguard of hurt.
That's very similar to something I used to tell myself when we had someone who was dying and a very angry family member. And I would just say that anger is the male's allowed expression of fear.
Yeah.
And if we were able to help them with the fear, the anger would diminish, and they would be able to be more present with their loved one instead of being so angry that it was happening.
Right. Yeah. That's real. And so sometimes when we hold that anger, what we find out is there's some pain underneath it, some underlying thing that we're protecting.
Yeah.
It's our bodyguard. Well, MaryBeth, is there a mindfulness resource that has sustained you or that you love that you could share with our listeners? I know we've already talked about a whole bunch. You mentioned your online yoga with Adrienne.
Adrienne Bartotino. Yeah, she's it's Yoga with Adrienne, I think. If you look her up, she's open for more people. That's she'll be in May. She's starting again. She just took a month off for self-care.
That's great.
Really, and the Tuesday evening meditations have been so wonderful. In fact, I've even gotten Guy to coast some too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that, for people who are listening, that is the Sri Lankan monks with the guide in Oakmont at the library now. So if you're in the
6
Pittsburgh
p.m.
area,
Yeah.
it's open to the public.
Yeah, and you don't have, it's not like religion. You don't have to know anything about it. They come, they sit, they talk for a few minutes about things that are happening. I think a couple of weeks ago it was something about road rage, we're talking about being mindful during driving, when things are you never know what somebody's rushing to or what's happening, why somebody's intense, those type of things. It's just a very, very relaxing, wonderful time with good people.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any other resource that you use or turn to, or book, or anything that you can think of?
I don't have a book or anything. I think I've just been sort of, I've been more of the embodiment than of the learningment. I don't know how to say
That's
it.
okay.
Yeah. So I don't think I've done that particularly. They'll probably come to me later.
No, that's okay. You don't
Poetry
have to.
books sometimes, things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Poetry is a wonderful, wonderful entry point.
There is a book I've just recently been looking at that has a lot of my favorite poets called Risking Everything.
Oh, wow.
Looking to see if I have it on my desk because I brought it to the retreat, but I don't see it. But yeah, Risking Everything, and it's like 100 poems, and it's got a whole bunch of different people, Rainer Marie Rilke and the Buddha, and you name it, they're all in there.
All right. Well, that's going on my Amazon wish list.
All right.
That's great. Well, is there anything else that I didn't ask about that you were thinking you might want to share related to kindness or meditation or mindfulness practices?
No, I'm just trying my best lately to see how I can use mindfulness and non-judgment and curiosity to be gentle in family communications as we get together for holidays with politics going on.
Yeah. Whew, that's
Just
a
being
big one.
curious,
That's a big one.
let it go.
And especially with the divide feeling so great in our country right now, the polarization so great. It's a
Yeah,
hard
what I'm finding is that the tiny things are the things that you can do that link you together, and then you don't have to worry about that. So,
Yeah. Do you have an
just
example of a tiny thing?
I mean, just cooking together or something, or
Yeah.
saying, oh, I want this recipe or that recipe, or you talk about the things that that you can, and give great support and reinforcement for the wonderfulness. And then I just try and deflect a little if it gets to something that's too tough.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those now. There are.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the call, and it was fun to get to know you in a different way because we know each other in a particular way. So this was really fun for me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll have to get together again soon.
Absolutely. And for listeners, that usually means a meal.
Yeah. I just made some chicken enchiladas tonight. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, MaryBeth.
All right.
Say Something Studios.